future trends, deep insights, industry leaders. This is the iGaming Next podcast with your host, Pierre Lindh.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Solutions, the leading iGaming PAM platform with a modular approach, including many benefits like a fast, secure, and scalable API-based platform, integrated with all major third-party products and services. Make sure you head over to Pragmatic Solutions and join our smart thinking.
And good afternoon, Tomash. I am very jealous of your background view here of the skyline of Miami. How are you doing over there today?
I'm doing great, keeping warm and looking forward to the discussion.
That's fantastic. And I want to start this conversation today with a bit of a story, because I think that I discovered and invented microbetting before anyone else, okay? So hang with me here. But it was maybe in a little bit of a different form, because I remember back in, I think it was like 2010, or I can't remember when the Winter Olympics was, but it was like around that time. Me and my friend Emil, we used to have this really good kind of like format of watching the Winter Olympics at where we would go and we would withdraw like $52 bills. So in Sweden we have like the $2 bill. We would just have like 50 of these each, and we would watch the Winter Olympics. It could be anything, like it could be one of the skiing things, ice hockey. It doesn't matter. Like, we would watch it, and we would just make these small bets all the time. Like, is it gonna fall the next one? Okay, we bet €2. Is it gonna do the backflip in the right way? Okay, 2. And these $2 bills would just fly back and forth for like 2 weeks straight. And it was like the most fond memory I have from like that time. And so I just want to mention here that this micro betting thing has been going on in the Lindh household for a very long time.
Yeah, I think it's a great story, right? I think it's one of the funnest ways to consume sport, and our genesis story is not too dissimilar. That's how I prefer to watch football, which is my favorite sport, and football in the European sense, football. And the thesis behind starting the company was traditional sports betting ultimately is a super user product, right? You need to have a high degree of confidence in all the lines that you're looking at. You're browsing this array of odds and trying to calculate probabilities, and then you make a bet and you have to wait 2 hours or 3 hours. It's not as fun, right? It's not as fun, and it's not as accessible to a casual user like myself. And that was the thesis behind why we started. We basically said, let's make it instantly gratifying, let's make it social, and let's make it such where a person can consume it a little bit more mindlessly with less cognitive and physical effort, right? So the most common form of gaming out there today is slots, and there's a reason for that. It doesn't take a lot of skill, and there's no barrier to entry. So how do we make sports betting a little bit more accessible and a lot more fun for people as they watch sports?
Right. And Tomash, so you're obviously the founder and the CEO of Kero Sports here then. So obviously, as most people have figured out by now, this is a venture into the micro betting products space that we are seeing emerging now. And can you just talk a little bit more, Tomash, of you are still pre-product in Kero Sports, but can you talk a little bit about how your efforts and strides have been going so far? You started the company just before the pandemic in 2020. You raised capital a couple of times. Talk about the journey so far with Kero Sports.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we're pre-product. We are pre-real money product, because we're sitting on a couple of gaming applications and vendor applications in various jurisdictions. But we've been live, as you said, since February 2020. And the thesis and the product has actually remained the same throughout the whole journey. And so what we were setting out to do back then was have people watch a hockey game. So we launched with the New York Islanders in the free-to-play space, and curate highly contextual binary micro bets throughout that game. So if there was a power play, we would curate a over/under 2.5 shots on this power play type market, and you can kind of assess for yourself, do you think they're going to have 2 shots or 3 shots or 4? And typically that market would resolve in 2 minutes, right? So it was nice, fun, easy, and within those 2 minutes we would deploy one more market on a penalty or an offside or something like that. And so keeping fans engaged with a curated binary micro betting experience was the thesis back then and what we launched with. And Luckily for us, we've seen a lot of traction in the free-to-play space. So we work with numerous NBA, NFL, NHL, collegiate, MLB teams on the free-to-play side. And over the last year or so, in tandem with some of our fundraising efforts, which I'm sure we'll talk about, have started to see a lot of interest and a lot of traction in the real money space to basically productize as a real money offering.
Right. And if we roll back the tape, say a year or 2 years, obviously there is a major competitor here, which is SimpleBet, who is currently live here at, and most people know about the B2C operation that is closely connected to SimpleBet, which is Better, which is partly funded by Jake Paul, of course, the controversial YouTube streamer, to say the least. But rolling back the tape a bit, when people started talking about this micro betting product, part of the critique, I suppose, or the expectation was like, is this product going to be sticky enough? Are players going to stick around? I think you can probably feel the same much better than me, but also question marks around latency issues and so on and so forth. At this stage in January 2022, do you feel that these kind of doubts against this product has been put to rest, or are there still parts of this product that needs to prove itself, say, or improve?
I mean, look, I don't want to speak to the SimpleBet numbers, but they seem to be incredible, right? From what they've published to date, I think stickiness is definitely not a concern for anybody. And I think it stems, again, from the fact that this is the most enjoyable way to bet on sports as you watch the game. Micro betting is not a pre-game activity. It makes no sense to micro bet before the game starts. But when you turn on that TV and you're watching that broadcast, I think an easy example is if LeBron James scores 3 3-pointers in a row, you're not thinking about his over-under total points for the game. That's a lot less relevant for you, but betting on the fact that he will score his 4th 3-pointer in a row is a lot more exciting, engaging, and creates more velocity to your liquidity, right? So it's your example of the $2 bills, right? You're either going to lose it or win it, and if you win it, you go again, and you go again, and you go again until your stack of $2 bills is done. And typically it's, and again, for us in a binary context, because I think that's one of the difference between us and SimpleBet is all of our markets are binary. We don't have a market that has 5 or 6 outcomes, right? So it's a lot less probable
yes or no,
that you're going basically to win. Exactly. Yes or no, over, under, foul, shots, throw in, etc. So you will lose some and win some, and statistically speaking, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to lose your $100 if you're making $2 bets, right? But you're going to have a lot of fun, just like you did with your friend during the Olympics.
Yeah, for sure. So you feel that today, is there still anything in the product that is unresolved, so to say, in kind of the micro betting kind of proposal in itself, or do you feel again that today we are at the point where the product is proven, there isn't really any major issues, so to say, or any areas of debate?
I think the product is really proven. What is not necessarily there yet is the latency of the broadcast. So it's kind of not as fun to bet on something that you haven't seen yet, right? So football is a great example. If there's a penalty, you have to deploy that market in real time as soon as the stats come in. But the person in the US might be on a 45-second delay, so they haven't seen the foul yet. And so it becomes kind of disconnected from the first screen. But speaking kind of 5 years from now, is the latency on TV broadcast going to get greater or shorter? Most likely it's going to get shorter, right, as technology adopts and evolves. And so I think that's probably the biggest hurdle from a user experience standpoint. I think as a product and its ability to generate value both for the end users and for the operators, I think that those questions have been put to rest.
Right. So on the latency issue, so say today in football, for example, the 45-second delay, that essentially limits the product on what type of bets that you can offer in real time, so to say. But there's still possibilities.
Yeah, and you can compensate for certain things, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to have markets that are real time. So for example, if there's a game happening between Barcelona and Real Madrid and the game starts out with a lot of fouls, and so each team has 10 fouls, but then over the next 10 minutes, there are no fouls. And so you can say, well, which team is going to commit the next foul starting at this particular moment in the game, right? So then the expectation is that, okay, I'm not going to wait 3 hours for that to resolve, but I might have to wait 2 minutes or something like that, right? And so you can kind of cross-reference the position that the people are in during the broadcast and the position that you're in as an absorber of the, Bet Radar or Bet Genius stats, and figure out what's a nice intuitive way to still make an exciting market without jeopardizing the fun factor.
No, fair enough. And are there sports, do you think, that will perform better than others with this type of product? I suppose, as you said, you've done the kind of free-to-play version of this already, so you would see, I suppose, some interesting trends there.
Great question, because I used to be of the school of thought that American sports were going to be the best. And naturally, because there's stop and goes and lots of different stats that people can bet on. But as we've built our football or soccer product, which is live now, and welcome anyone that's interested, we're welcome to do a demo for you. It's actually a lot better than I thought we could ever make it to be, because there's still a lot happening. The sport it's almost like the random number generator, right? And what we build is kind of the client, the game, the slot machine on top of it, right? But there's a lot happening in football, even when it's not happening. If both teams are attacking well, for example, you can make that into, hey, each team just had 10 dangerous attacks in the last 5 minutes. Which one is going to take the next shot? Or will there be a shot from outside the box? And that still creates a bit of an emotional investment on the user side in kind of what happens next, right? Depending on who's on the field, or if there's a player that you love. I'm sure you're a fan of Haaland. If I gave you a Haaland market, like, will you have a header?
Now we're talking Norwegian players here. Well, I'm Swedish. Zlatan Ibrahimovic we're talking about. He's the number one, okay?
The king. But he's not around anymore. So I think actually they're all pretty good. It's really the art and craft that goes into it, and I think that's another distinction between us and SimpleBet. I think with SimpleBet, it's I don't want to speak too much on their product, but it's a lot of kind of predefined markets, right? That are like outcome of the next possession. With us, it's not pre-scripted. It's sort of being extrapolated from what is happening in the game, right? So our markets, we deploy, we have about a couple 100,000 permutations of different markets throughout the game. And so we kind of pick out the best one, and typically it's grounded in what's happening in the game, right? So it's less so a predefined one and more so something just happened or something hasn't happened, right? And that becomes a lot more exciting for the user.
Right. So for you, looking at this product, you talk about the North American market, and obviously, again, SimpleBet, American startup. You based in Miami, obviously, but you were saying that this doesn't necessarily have to only be relevant to North American sports, which is like stop and start based usually, but actually this can become a global product as well, and that's perhaps what you are looking at as well. So just following up on that question, what's your strategy looking like in that regard? Are you focusing predominantly still on the US, or the world is your oyster type of thing today?
The world is definitely our oyster, and my first venture into the European kind of gaming space was last year when I went to SBC. And I just opened, actually it was WGS, correction.
Right.
That was the first conference that I attended.
Yeah, we met over there. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And so my eyes just opened to how much more mature and just how much business there was to do globally. Because, when you grow up in the US, you kind of have these blinders on, right? You think the US market is the market. But I think with gaming, it's really not. And there are a lot of mature operators and industries outside of the US. And so we've seen that trajectory. And that was part of a happy outcome for me because, as I said, for me, football is my sport, right? So I always wanted to productize for football. And football is 90-something% of all the volume outside of the US. So it's been great because we were able to focus on something that I was personally passionate on and also expand kind of our addressable market beyond just the US operators.
Fair enough. And a funny story from WDS is that me and Robin Reed were sitting having lunch randomly in the bar at WDS, and Robin had just been pitched this company that he wasn't like that keen on, and I think randomly you kind of joined our little group, and it became a little bit of a pitch between you and Robin. He was interested to hear your product, and that obviously then turned out to eventually lead to that investment. It was very random encounter, right, between you guys. And
yeah, it was Davis Catlin, I think, who was also sitting with you guys. And he was like, "Hey, Tomash, come show your product to Robin."
Yeah.
A very serendipitous encounter.
Funny how these things happen.
Exactly.
Also, just to linger on this a little bit more, you talked as well previously about the importance of like the social experience in the product as well. How do you integrate like a social experience in an app that is so simple? That is generally usually like a kind of like a yes or no question. Like first of all, like why do you want to complicate the product a bit more with these additional features? Why not just focus on simplicity? Say.
Yeah, that's a good question. It may stem from how I discovered microbetting or invented it, right? You said you either discovered or invented it. So how I discovered or invented it is I have a lot of friends that are spread out all around the world, and they're all fans of different football teams. So I'm a big Real Madrid fan. I have lots of Barcelona fans. And anytime those two teams play, what are we doing? We're in a group chat, making bets with each other. Sergio Ramos gets a yellow card. Well, guess what? It's very likely he's going to get a red card, right? So there's a $50 bet flying across that group. And so for me, my personal experience was that social, being able to consume that experience with other people digitally, was a very nice compliment from a user standpoint. And I think from an operator standpoint, what social does is it keeps people in the product, right? Typically, you take any operator product, I go in, I make a bet, there's no more value left there for me. So I'm going to switch and go someplace else. And typically that someplace else is Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. But now if you want to serve that person another bet 30 seconds later, you have to reacquire them somehow. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to push notify them 300 times during a game? You can't do that. So social creates a buffer in between micro markets that people can kind of stick around, whether they participate or just consume the chat. And the chat essentially is a big group chat. It's a big WhatsApp group, to simplify it. The chat is entertaining. So it creates a baseline level of entertainment value. And while folks are consuming that, somebody's talking trash about Haaland versus Ibrahimovic, right? So to you, that's interesting. You might be writing a message. Haaland has nothing on Ibra. And while you're doing that, here's the next bet, right? Oh, corner kick, City are now on 9. Can they get to 10 corner kicks by minute 15 in the game or something, right? And what just happened is you were inadvertently subscribed to the next market, right? But if you were somewhere else, you would miss that next market. So keeping folks on the platform is very important, and I think social does that.
Fair enough. And I suppose it also ties together with creating networking effects in the product as well, where obviously users attracting other users by inviting their friends for that purpose, I suppose.
If it's fun, right? So you got to make it, I think, like our key is we're not going to be a product where the sharps and the kind of the biggest sports bettors are going to be using it. This is more for the mass market, right? How do you make sports betting a mass market? And I think it has to boil down to the entertainment value that it provides, right? People can't lose too much money, and so that's where the binary kind of solves it. And people can't have a dull experience. So if you make that experience fun and exciting for them, that's the best way to attract more users. That's the best way to get those organic referrals, right? And we see that in free-to-play all the time. People say, I picked this up in the Chicago Bulls app, and now my whole family plays. Well, why do they play? It's because you had so much fun. You told your entire family to join as well.
Cool. I don't want to talk too much about Simple Bet and Better today, but it is the elephant in the room to some extent. And, Simple Bet, they raised, the seed round was like $15 million or something like that. Second round, $30 million. So totally raised capital, $45 million. Better than the B2C operation, raised another $50 million with Jake Paul behind it. On your side, obviously, Tomash, you raised a couple of million. How do you expect to compete against this very yeah, obviously much better funded product, so to say, that has a couple of years ahead.
Yeah, look, I think first of all, our products are a little bit different in the first place, and secondly, just like any athlete, I think the best competition is with yourself. It's not by looking at somebody else or what they're doing. It's what are we doing? Are we on the right strategy? Do we have the right team? Are we executing well against our plan? And so far, we've done that really well. We were self-funded for the first 2 years, right? So in reality, we were nothing compared to other companies, but from a funding standpoint. But we executed really well, and our fundraising efforts have been pretty good of late. And, had we wanted more capital, we probably could have raised it, but there's also a negative side to raising too much, right? So we actually capped our last round, which was already oversubscribed. We probably could have raised twice the amount of capital. But I think capital doesn't necessarily define your success alone, right? What defines your success is your merit. And so our merit is grounded in a very clear-cut vision, a team that believes that vision, and what we're seeing now from the market, a pretty good product market fit. I always joke that most startups have this problem where they don't have a sticky product and they're throwing things at the wall trying to see what sticks. We have the opposite of that problem. We have so much demand, and we are constantly just building to satisfy that demand, right? Different sports, different types of, as I said, vendor licenses where we have customers that are ready to go, but we don't have a license, etc. So we just got to execute, and I think looking at ourselves is probably the better strategy than looking outwards.
You're in good company on that front. I think it was Jeff Bezos of Amazon who always talks about that many companies, they make the mistake of being competitor obsessed. So they think more about what is the competition doing. But Jeff Bezos, he keeps saying that you should be customer obsessed. That's the only thing that matters. What is the customer thinking about? Not necessarily what the competitor is doing. So it seems like you are in healthy company in that regard.
It's conviction, right? You have to have conviction in what you're doing, because if you are focused on competitors, then you're suddenly going to change your strategy all the time. And is that good? I don't know, right? I think if it's working, why change it, right? Like I always use sports as a great analogy to business. You have teams like Real Madrid that have a certain style of play, and Liverpool that has a different style of play, and Guardiola's City has it. And so it works for all of them, right? If you change it constantly, it's not going to work.
Fair enough. So you recently managed to raise this second round of capital. I think in the press release, it's $2 million that you managed to raise from the likes of YOLO and Happy Hour, which obviously we share the same investors here. We are in the same family, so to say. Obviously, these two investors are some of the most respected and highly regarded investors of the iGaming industry. But the road to close the investment was fairly long. I mean, like I said, you had these 2 years, and you did raise one round early in 2022 as well. But can you talk about your experience in these 2 years? Like, why didn't you raise capital earlier? And when you decided to raise capital, how was the experience? And just as a closing point here, the first capital you raised was just at the beginning of 2022, where the economy was still in a good place, and then second round of funding was obviously closed in November of 2022, when the economy had kind of gone sideways a little bit, at least from an investment point of view. So I'm very curious to hear your story here on the raising capital journey.
Yeah, I think it's I hope that some of the younger entrepreneurs listening will kind of take some of these lessons to heart. We raised 2 years into the business, not necessarily for lack of trying. We, at most points of the journey after about year one, have thought about, well, we have something, right? We knew we had something based on kind of the customer feedback and the user feedback. But it took a while because I've never raised capital before. And so you gotta, it's an art as well, right? So it's an art of telling your story concisely, executing, showing people that you're constantly progressing and evolving and getting better at what it is that you do. And the big mistake that I've made, and I really hope that this lesson kind of stays with some folks who are listening, is I went to the general VC world and said, hey, this is what I'm working on. And that probably cost me 6 months to a year of time, because I really shouldn't have done that. Where I think we should have gone right away, and where we eventually ended up, is with the industry, right? There's a lot of very smart, high net worth individuals, funds, even operators that have their own funds, that had we just gone to them right away, we probably would have been in a far, far kind of better place from a timing standpoint on our fundraisers. And for me, the catalyst became kind of getting a few advisors in the door. So Benji Cherniak, huge shout out. He was one of the first guys that kind of took us under his wing and said, I like what you're doing. I'm going to help you out, make some introductions. And that was the catalyst to our success. And so Benji, an OG of the industry, again, huge shout out to him. And from there, we kind of said, no more Andreessens and everything else. Like, it's just a waste of time, right? People don't understand the business. They don't understand how to make money. And sometimes they want returns that are not necessarily similar to what a B2B company might return, right? So a 10X to a huge venture fund in San Francisco is not as exciting as it might be to a Benji. Right? But the company nonetheless needs capital. So why not go and fish where the fish are versus where the fancy fish are that you are never going to catch? So that's kind of the first, because your question was multi-part. And so we raised our first round as $1 million on 10 posts. And then we started to get some good traction. So getting into going to a lot of conferences, participating in a lot of pitch competitions. We consciously avoided the accelerator path because we always thought that we were a little bit past that point. But the pitch competitions were great. And I always said this to every other founder that was there. It's as much a fundraising exercise as a customer building exercise, right? When you go out there and you kind of pitch your story and tell people what you're doing. And it's been fantastic for us. And lo and behold, we do our first one and we fail. we don't win. And so it's like, you're sad, but it's a good milestone to take a look inwards and reflect, are we worthy of winning? And if not, if the answer is no, and you're being honest with yourself, why? And so then we did another pitch competition. This was the first two were at SBC. Failed to win that as well. Again, take another introspective look. Why didn't we win? And luckily, then we do our third one at SBC. We win, and then I go to your conference in Valletta, and I do the Hot Six. It's not a competition per se; it's more of a session where 6 companies showcase their products. And Robin Reed is in the room. He's one of the panelists, and so I do my 15-minute spiel. Come off, and then I catch Robin at the end of it because he asked some good questions. And a couple of weeks later, we had our big investor in our round. So it was great. And I think, again, networking, having obviously a good product, having a good level of traction is extremely important. And getting in front of these folks early, because based on your story, right, we've met initially in June at WGS with Robin. He kind of liked us, but I'm sure he has a lot of companies that he looks at. And then fast forward to October, was it? I think it was October. Yeah, October we meet again, and then we close that round very quickly after that. So staying on, being present, continuing to tell your story, and making sure that there's an actual progression arc in your story, I think are the key ingredients.
I find it so interesting as well, the fact that, Tomash, you don't have a history in the iGaming industry. And oftentimes this industry is very based on your reputation, your background. Have you proven yourself to some extent earlier in the industry and so on? And so I suppose, as you mentioned here earlier, to then get someone like Benji Cherniak on board as your strategic advisor, who has that reputation, who can put his name on your product and who can open the right doors so that you can get the right meetings and so on, must be more or less essential for someone like yourself and coming in, trying a venture for the first time.
Absolutely. And it was not just Benji, right? Benji was kind of the conduit to some other folks. Lloyd Danzig, another huge shout out to him. He was awesome. And Lloyd, I really just, I reached out to Lloyd and said, hey, Lloyd, I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. Here's what I'm working on. And we just kind of bonded over this vision of micro betting and the future, and then ended up doing a couple of fun things with we actually did a panel together. This was during COVID, where we played FIFA. We recorded a session, and instead of just talking like this, we played FIFA and we talked about micro betting. So we did some fun things, and yeah, I think reputation is critical, but reputation is something you have to work for initially, right? So you got to start somewhere, and I think you just got to take it seriously, and so that's what I did. I was not in this industry at all, but step by step, you establish yourself, and again, you just got to have traction and show that you're executing, and people will recognize that.
There's a lot of talk around the pitch deck when you go to raise investment. So kind of like your CV for the company, if you will, and also your pitch for the company, obviously. What do you think now, as you've gone through this process a couple of times? How important is the pitch deck, and what is the perfect pitch deck in your opinion?
It's definitely not one with a lot of information. My first pitch decks, oh man, there were so many slides and details, and what I realized ultimately was people are not buying your company. People are betting on you to succeed. And so the goal is different. You don't need to relay every little bit of information. What you need to do is tell them a concise enough story that they can understand and they can believe in, and show to them that you are going to be successful, because ultimately any investor is just betting on your success. They're not buying your company. They don't need to know every little detail about your company and your vision and strategy, especially because sometimes that strategy changes. So the pitch deck, I think, is key, but it's sort of what it tells, right? It's that story has to be very concise. And it frankly took me a long time to figure out how to do that well. And luckily I did, because if I hadn't, if you look at some of my earlier decks, it was a complete nightmare.
Fun to see play by play how they look like at some point.
Yes, so much information. Nobody's looking past slide 2. I go back sometimes and I'm like, whoever read through to the end, thank you very much, because this is a lot.
and so you've been in a lot of meetings with a lot of different investors from the industry, outside the industries, major VCs, and in between. Is there a red thread in what the investors are looking for when they consider a investment, or do they all come in from widely different angles?
So for us, again, I go back to my notion of not fishing where the fancy fish are. I've talked to them all, and the common denominator was people from the industry really all have the same sort of common understanding and insights to establish whether you're going to be a successful business or not. General funds that don't focus on our vertical tend to ask a lot of questions and might even like it, but the way that funds work, right, is you have one partner that has to take it to the rest of the partners, and so the road to getting an actual deal done is so complicated, it most of the time will fall through. So working with industry folks is probably key for any startup in the space, because they just get it, right? And I'm not saying that they're going to write you a check, but they will understand what you're up to much, much better and be able to give you that kind of feedback. And we've had some folks look at us and say, hey, we're not sure. You have competitors who are better funded, et cetera, and that's great, right? Or we want to see additional traction, which to me is always not a negative, it's a positive, right? Like if we don't have your conviction yet, we're going to get it, because we're going with or without you, right? We're going to execute no matter who backs us, and making sure that you execute, though, is the key, right? If you can show folks execution, I think that gives you the reputation and the confidence from your investors to back you on the next steps.
And I suppose that's possibly the most difficult part of being an entrepreneur is, coming up with an idea. Anyone can come up with an idea that is great on paper, but how do you execute that idea, especially when you have so limited funds? How do you attract talent when you can't afford to pay as high wages as your established competitors, for example? How was your journey when you started out as an entrepreneur? How did you gain foothold here? Because there must have been a lot of challenges for you to even get started.
Including COVID, right? We launched 3 weeks before COVID. And in retrospect, COVID was a blessing. But at the time, it was so scary. But extremely glad that we launched, because COVID was a moment that tested my conviction, right? We weren't sure sports were going to come back. We weren't sure if humanity was going to survive. Like, if you go back to April, right? It was very, very scary times. Yeah. And so, should you be working on a startup or kind of having your last days with your family? It's a big existential question. And luckily for me, we had already launched and seen this incredible fanfare from the end users, from our initial partners around the product. And I knew that at some point, if sports do come back, we were onto something. And I don't necessarily recommend this for folks, but being bootstrapped and operating on our own kind of capital is a great habit to establish, it establishes great habits, right? Because capital tends to make you a bit loose from a financial standpoint, right? Oh yeah, we can invest in this, but when you don't have it, you have to focus on the core things. And so for us, being self-funded and bootstrapped for the first couple of years really created some strong habits around not having waste, around being able to focus on things that are important, prioritize, knowing that you're not going to get everything, but making bets on what will be impactful and focusing on that one thing. And I think we've carried that through to now, and that may be part of the reason, or part of the answer to your earlier question of how will we compete. Well, we've never been a bloated organization. We don't necessarily need $40 million to make a good product and sell it.
Right. The entrepreneurial journey is riddled with obstacles and dragons and fire and pain, and especially for you, starting out just a month before COVID and seemingly the rug being pulled under you, now operating in an environment which doesn't need this product essentially. Did you have moments where you're thinking of giving up?
Yeah, for sure. When the credit line was maxed out and things like that, for sure.
Oh my god. Yeah, because you're self-funded, right? So you put in your own savings into this product.
Yeah, self-funded for the first couple of years. Again, I don't necessarily recommend it to folks, but if you can do it and come
that's hardcore. That's a pure entrepreneur. I like that.
It gives you some good habits. There was recently somebody asked me, because they're mentoring a founder, and they said, what book should they read? Is it like 0 to 1 or whatever? Right. And I said, to be honest with you, a good book for an entrepreneur to read is The Alchemist, or something else Paulo Coelho, or anything about the journey, a difficult journey and conviction that gets you through that journey, because every story is different, right? And the obstacles that I faced may not be faced by another entrepreneur, but staying convicted and also having a very honest, introspective look at certain milestones and saying, like, do people really like my product? Do people really want to buy my product? Will I make money? Do I have a good team? Am I a good leader? Am I capable at this thing, or am I capable in this particular aspect of my business, right? Being honest with yourself on those things, and if the answers are yes, staying convicted, it's probably the best advice, right? And that's, I think a lot of folks don't do one or the other and fail. Like, I'll give you another anecdote. When we launched pre-COVID, we initially rolled out to the New York Islanders Reddit fan base, because they said, let's micro soft launch this. And so we roll it out and we see this incredible engagement. And 2 weeks go by and they said, this is great. Okay, let's go live. We'll have TV ads and push notifications and everything. And I realized, oh my God, we just had the most engaged user group for that sports scene, right? Because if you're on the subreddit, you're probably a major fan of that team. And now we're going to democratize it to everybody else. My engagement is going to drop. And I literally took a moment there to ask myself, if it does drop, should I keep going? Right? Because if it did, well, clearly people don't want my product. And it takes a little bit of kind of guts to have those conversations with you versus just blindly carrying through. Lucky for us, when we democratized it, it actually went up even more because of the kind of the scale that it brought, and the chat and everything else that kind of got folks together. So we didn't have that problem. But being honest with yourself along the journey is very important.
Yeah, there is an interesting dichotomy there, right? Where on the one hand, as an entrepreneur, you need to have an aspect of delusion as part of your personality, because the road ahead is going to be so unreasonably difficult that no sane person would ever go on it, right? And most likely you're going to fail. So like you will most likely experience pain, and then you will fail, right? And then you will be left with, you know, the shame of failing, so to say. But and so to go on that journey, you need that conviction, as you're talking about, like believe in the product, like even if you have a bad day, keep going, so on and so forth. But the dichotomy is that you also need to know when it is time to give up, like when it's actually time, like this is actually not working out. Because we have a family friend who ended up going on this journey, and 20 years later is still committed to make this venture work, and is bleeding money, like has bled the family's money dry, has bled the friends' money dry, and it's just he has committed himself to the point where if he now quits 20 years later, it is like, the curtain drops, it's like you come back to reality. So it's almost like you committed to go through, to carry on, because you don't want to face reality. I think that's a dichotomy, and entrepreneurship is like balancing that. It's a dangerous journey sometimes.
I agree, but that's why it's almost like a stop loss in trading stocks, right? Like if you don't have it, you're going to go to zero. So you need to, in advance, set up the kind of the proof points, right? If I can see this, I will go on. But if I don't see this, then I will stop. And that gives you that early exit where you're not going to burn the entire position, but you burn 10%, 15% or whatever of your position. So you have to be honest with yourself on those things, right? You need to have those stop losses, whether it's 10%, 20 or whatever. That's up to you, right? But if you don't have that, it could be very, very dangerous. And so for us, luckily, it never hit those marks, right? There were difficult times, COVID, it's things we controlled, things we didn't control, but we never saw this user or partner feedback that said, this is not for us, this is not good, this is not performing.
And also perhaps, you mentioned earlier here that COVID was a blessing for you guys, and it seems counterintuitive when COVID actually caused the sports betting market to retract for quite some time. But I suppose that the opportunity or the blessing in that environment is that the carpet was pulled out from all your potential competitors and the whole industry at once, so that it was kind of like everything was up in the air for a while, and from that comes opportunity perhaps as well, even if there's a drawback. And then there's a certain type of personality who will then take advantage of that, and there's another personality who will give up at that point as well, I suppose.
Well, where I think COVID helped us the most is it created this blank slate. I remember May 2020, we're talking to different providers and operators, and everyone's basically saying, we don't have anything for folks to bet on. So now we're looking for new solutions. And that gave us a lot of good intros that normally people wouldn't have taken the meeting because they would be too busy doing something. But suddenly everyone's kind of at a standstill trying to figure out, well, what can we do? What are the solutions that are out there? And, nobody took our solution, but it gave us the initial introduction to come back later on and say, hey, by the way, now we've done this, now we've done this, now we've reached this milestone, and establish those early relationships on the kind of real money betting side. And then on the sports side, it was great because, well, they had no fans in arenas anymore. So they needed digital assets. And we became a great kind of digital fan engagement solution for the pro sports world, and very quickly went from, one sports team to dozens that we have now.
Fantastic, Tomash. I love that the journey that you've had, through very difficult times, and you gotten yourself to this point. Obviously, close to funding with some of the most respected investors of the industry, and it seems like there is a fantastic opportunity here now to do something great. And so, on that note as well, to start running off a bit today, what comes next for Kero Sports now? What is the roadmap for 2023, and when are you expecting to go live with real money play?
Yeah, so Q1, hopefully by end of Q1, we should be live in a couple of different jurisdictions, Europe, North America, maybe even LATAM. And really the path is just that, just do more and more and more of that, continue to build and iterate on our product, maybe add some new sports. Let's see how that goes. Today we cover, the 4 major sports in America plus football. So it's really more of the same. The strategy, as I said, has been the same for a while, and that conviction remains. And so it's just close more operator deals, launch our product in more jurisdictions, and start to have some real money gaming revenue coming in, which is kind of the big milestone for us, right? It's been a long journey, and so we're very much looking forward to that milestone.
Tomash, I'm looking forward to following the journey, and thank you so much for giving me your valuable time today. I will see you in New York in a couple of months, and hopefully we can have 1 or 4 margaritas together and follow up on the conversation at that time.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much, Tomash.
Bye-bye.